Hello and welcome to the Garden of the Black Roses. This is my next chapter in... I was about to say Magic of Moonlight. No, I was just writing a bit of Magic of Moonlight. No, this is the next chapter in one of my original stories. The Adventures of the Iron Wolves. Book 1, Alpha. Chapter 6. Burst of Reality. Anima shot up in bed with a start. The morning light filtered through the window, scattering spots of sunlight all over her room. What was that? She walked over to the dressing table and brushed her hair. A cold feeling crept over her. She slowly put the brush down. Why? Opening the door to her room, she placed a hand on the wall and followed it down, not sure where she was going. Feeling someone near her, she moved to place her back against the wall. "Who's there?" "Anima," a deep voice replied. "I'm glad you're safe. Starks would have my head if anything happened to you." She stepped forward and touched the person's chest. Lightweight material met her fingers. She ran her fingers up, the material changing into a heavier material wrapped around his neck. "Dusk," she said softly. Glad she couldn't see the assassin's scarf. She was very sure the red colouring would dazzle her too much. "Where's Nemia and Crystal?" Dusk didn't respond. "Dusk?" "Nemia is with Kuros," he said, slowly extending his arm for her to take a hold of. They walked for a while towards a small chapel within the headquarters. "Crystal is no longer with us." He led her into the chapel where a light jasmine incense filled the air. Anima could see the outline of the altar, the candles and their bright flames, and a coffin. "She died from a gun mage's bullet as you two approached the walls." "I don't understand," Anima said softly, placing two hands on the coffin. "She was with me up until we reached headquarters." Not hearing Dusk's reply, she asked quietly, "Explain to me how that makes sense." Deep down, she knew it made sense. Crystal had jerked as if she had been hit. She had stopped Anima from examining her. She had lied so she wouldn't worry. Anima clenched her hands tightly into a fist. "She was set in bringing you here," he replied in an even tone that angered her. He sensed her anger and ploughed on regardless. "Before she died, she wrote 2 letters for you. One is about what happened at the Lunarian castle. The other..." He swallowed hard, not wanting to bring it up. "Is regarding the question she said you had for her when you awoke." "Notes!" Anima barked a laugh and banged a fist on Crystal's coffin, hard enough to make Dusk wonder if it could wake the dead. "I can't bloody see!" she screamed at him. "I haven't been able to see anything! I wake up cold and scared for no reason, and now I find out my father is dead. Now I find out that not only my father is dead, but the Oracle is dead as well." She rounded on him, her eyes open and blazing. Dusk stepped back, even though he knew she couldn't see him. He didn't want to have to protect himself against her. "Where's Stykes?" she asked through gritted teeth. She knew that with his strength, he would have been back by now. "Stykes hasn't come back yet," he replied, taking a few more steps back. Anima growled low in her throat. Dusk felt it best to leave her alone for now. Nemia sat holding Hannah's hand. Hannah. Her voice echoing through the dark room to her small audience. I see a wood, small but dense. Our prince is there, hurt and alone. I see 4 go, and 6 return. She closed her eyes. Styx is in danger. 4? Hawkeye asked, looking at Blade and Aruna before staring back at Nemia. There's only 3 here, unless you're coming too. Not me. She lifted the hand Hannah held. Hawkeye's shocked gasp reached her ears. You need Hannah to find Styx. Hannah jumped up and into Hawkeye's arms. She's the only one capable of finding him in his present state. She's just a child, Hawkeye cried, hugging Hannah worriedly. Why can't anyone else find her? Because, Nemia replied patiently, as if explaining the very basics of life. She is Anima's apprentice. The news shocked Hawkeye into silence. Styx laid staring at the sky, his body still feeling heavy. Something worried him. Mariel had mentioned that Anima had the same stew that he did, and didn't like it as well. A herb that paralyzed him would kill a human. Unless Mariel lied, Anima isn't totally human. He lost count how many times the sun came up and set. He felt like he was going to die here, alone and severely paralyzed. His stomach rumbled loudly, and a smile crept over his face at the strangeness of the feeling of feeling hunger more than fear. She's gonna murder me, he thought, attempting to lift his arm and failing miserably. From his limited viewing range, he could see Mariel was no longer with him. I wonder where she went to. He laughed, surprised that he could laugh as loud as he could. I should be more worried on her coming back. Are you all right? A little girl leaned over him. A small dagger sat on her left hip, with the Iron Wolf's crest stamped into the tan leather sheath. A pouch, similar to Anima's, sat on her right hip. Anima said you have a good eye for spotting potential alchemists, she added, hoping that would make him feel better. He recognized her and smiled. What are you doing here? You would have been safe if you stayed in Dida. The little girl disappeared from view and came back with a blanket. She pulled it over his body and then came back to his head, and with a smile. How did you find me? I used the tracking device Anima taught me how to use, she said brightly. Nemia said I could find you faster than anyone else. She put her fingers to her lips and whistled the long, high-pitched whistle, followed by 3 short, and then the long, low whistle that Styx recognized as the Iron Wolf's call. She said you were going to need my help. He heard whispers approach behind her. Plenty of help. "You look a mess," said a familiar voice. "No wonder Nemias told us to find you." Two assassins came into view to stand at his right. A priest, who had picked up Styx's clothes, appeared on his left. "Hawkeye, Blade," he said quietly to the assassins. "Aruna." He looked at the healer. He tried to hide his happiness in seeing them. He knew well that he couldn't hide his feelings, at least from Hawkeye and Aruna. They could read him like a book if they wanted to. "Mariel's not around?" They shook their heads. "Add her to the list," he said angrily, attempting to sit up but only managing to tense his muscles to lift a little off the ground before falling back. "What happened?" Hawkeye asked, placing a hand securely under Styx's shoulders and sat him up. "You're lying here, as weak as a newborn babe, and without a stitch on." Blade handed him Styx's jacket, and together they carefully threaded his arms through the holes. After the three completely dressed him, they propped him against a nearby tree. "Mariel isn't who she seems to be," Styx said quietly. He could manage to move his hand to pull out his jacket. "I trusted her completely, because Anima trusted her. But Anima has a bracelet that lights up when Mariel is near. Maybe it's a binding on Mariel?" The three looked at each other confused. Styx continued to mumble randomly about things in his head. Aruna sighed and placed her hands on his shoulders. Hawkeye and Blade watched as the pale yellow glow surrounded her hands. "He was fed a paralyzing agent. It hasn't released its hold on him yet." Aruna sat back on her heels and lifted Styx's chin to look into his eyes. "I can remove some of it, but it would take time." "I want to move," Styx replied, focusing on her eyes. He wanted something stable to keep his mind from drifting again. "Whatever it is keeps giving me lucid moments among all the fuzz in my head." She nodded and released his hand. Coming to the little girl, she smiled. "Hannah, can you find me a bright bluebell flower?" "A flower?" She ran to take Blade's hand. "Come, let's go find a bluebell." Blade got up and followed Hannah into the forest. Hawkeye watched them go before looking back at Aruna. "You're going to kill him if you use that method." "You killed his father using it." Aruna shook her head and made the trill sound of a bird. "You're going to use a familiar." "I didn't have a familiar for his father when the same plant was used to paralyze him," Aruna said, kneeling next to Styx. "I do now, because I had a feeling I was going to need one when Nemia mentioned poison. This little dove will be his familiar." Aruna placed the dove on Styx's lap. She pressed her thumb against his neck, breaking the skin with her nail, and allowing blood to flow down his chest. She lifted her finger, and the trail of blood rose upwards to wrap around her finger like a string. Styx's eyes widened, the thread of blood becoming thicker. His back arched against the tree, his body shaking violently. Aruna touched the dove, letting the thread of blood drape over it. Blood seeped into its body, colouring the tips of its feathers red. "That should be sufficient for now." She pressed the wound in his neck with 2 fingers, and with a touch of her power, healed it completely. Hawkeye caught Styx as he slid sideways. his pointed ears twitching at a distant sound. "We have company." Aruna sat up straight, her own pointed ears twitching. "And I don't think it's Blade and Hannah." Aruna nodded in agreement. Hawkeye moved Stykes back to lean against the tree. Drawing his daggers, he listened carefully to the sounds around him. Stykes raised his head and stroked the dove. "It's probably King Ian with his entourage. There's one of Anima's bodyguards who I'm meant to rescue, but I'm having second thoughts." "You know that if you don't rescue her," Hawkeye said, keeping a sharp eye out, "Anima will probably attempt it herself. Her eyes still haven't healed, so you know how reckless that would be." "But what if she turns out to be another person like Mariel?" Stykes asked. His serious self deep in his consciousness snapped at him angrily for the childish thought. "Mariel was my maid at the Elven Palace. If Miyako turns out to be another person of my past, I might not be so lucky this time round." "Mariel is an elf? She was your maid?" Aruna asked incredulously. "I thought the elves of the Iron Wolves were the only ones to come out when you escaped. I didn't know more came out into this dimension." "My brother, Shiro, is selling his blood in the form of red collars," Stykes said, pulling his legs under him so he could try to stand. "I think he was the one who brought Mariel with him." He stood shakily before sitting back down hard. "He probably brought an entire court with him like I did." "But there's a difference between being the chosen crown prince and an exiled prince," Hawkeye replied, exasperated at this piece of information. "In any case, Shiro wouldn't have been able to make it out of the gate with many other wolves. Elves! He paused, his eyes gaining comprehension. "Anima." Stykes looked up at him. "What about Anima?" "What's wrong?" Stykes asked, standing more steadily, with his hand on the tree for support. "Anima should be safe in Lunarias when I left her before coming here." "Mariel isn't here," Hawkeye said slowly, looking clearly at Stykes. If she still isn't here, then where is she?" Stykes' eyes grew wide, his whole body wobbled from lack of concentration. "The herb she fed you paralyzed your elf side. It kills humans. So unless Anima is a half-elf like you, which I'm pretty sure she isn't, she'll die." Hawkeye's words were like a confirmation to Stykes. Anima wasn't truly human. But that leaves two potential situations. Either she knows and is hiding it, or she doesn't know at all. Stykes watched as Hawkeye's eyes narrowed, as if to tell him something he knew all along. Your mother, Queen Elena, was human, and was slipped the same plant that caused her death. A click sounded in Anima's ears. "You're back." Her voice didn't sound pleased at his return. "I was wondering how long it would take before your sense of duty made you come back." "I don't have much of a choice," Dusk replied, his jaw tensing. Either I get murdered by you while I keep an eye on you, or murdered by Styx for leaving you alone. So you feared the latter? Anima's voice bubbled with anger. That's why you came back. Dusk searched for something to say. Failing to find anything suitable, he said, Mariel has returned. He realized this piece of information lessened her anger. Do you want me to take you to Mariel? Anima nodded her head and waited for Dusk to come and offer his arm to her again. But I want to see Nemea as well. Mariel stood staring at the target about 50 paces ahead of her, her long ivory bow held tight in her hand, her mind zeroing in on the task at hand. She could feel Anima's presence behind her, and refused to acknowledge she was there. Acknowledging her would replay the scene with Styx in her head again. Mariel. Anima's voice sounded calm to her ears. Face me, please. I know you're trying to avoid speaking with me. She slowly turned around. Styx's voice flooded in her head, and she paled. Dusk moved forward, fearing she'd faint. Styx and I had a fight, Mariel said, saying the lie she had been rehearsing from the moment she stepped into Pater's village until now. She waited in surprised silence. Anima made no move to touch her. You believe me? She asked, her voice much higher than she anticipated. You haven't lied to me before. Anima's tone sounded suspiciously like annoyance. Why would you start now? Mariel mentally breathed a sigh of relief. Anima used to always touch her when she said something. Anima nodded and gestured with her hand, letting Mariel know she was free to go back to her archery practice. With a pat on Dusk's arm, they left, leaving her feeling there was more to that encounter than she knew. The next day, Anima sat in Kuros' study, with his guards situated everywhere in and out of the building. Nemea and Dusk sat with her, their ears in tune to every sound around them. So you sent Hawkeye, Blade, and Aruna to search for Styx? Anima asked quietly, repeating Nemea's words. Mariel poisoned Styx? She leaned against the wall. Why would she do that? What reason? Nemea touched the point in her ears and looked at Dusk, who nodded. Anima, Nemea said softly, Styx is the crown prince of the elves. A crash sounded, and before the two could catch her, Anima sat hard on the ground. Her doubt at Rello's words melted away, but the renewed knowledge and the shock, the truth still hit her like a ton of bricks. Nemea came over and knelt beside her. The dimension where the elves lived was being destroyed piece by piece. We still don't know who was doing it. Styx and his elder brother Shiro were being protected with their parents by the palace guards, and those of us common elves who were left. Her voice caught in her throat. Anima felt dusk touch her cheek. Suddenly, the royal family began to die off. He said quietly, "First, Stykes' mother was killed. Aruna said it was poison. We knew because his mother was human that some plants in our world were poisonous to only her. Then his father was paralyzed by the same plant. Aruna tried to heal him, but the amount of the plant was so much that he died as well. Shiro was pronounced the crown prince. No sooner had he become ruler, he became cruel. He sent common elves, those who supported him, those who admired him, to fight the unknown enemy. He knew that his parents stopped sending armies against it because no elves ever returned to tell them what was destroying their world, and yet he began to send them again anyway. We pleaded with him to stop, but he refused to listen to us. Elves lost faith in him and turned to Stykes, who was now the last of the royal line. Nemia placed her hand on Dusk's shoulder. He smiled and nodded to her. Stykes decided to flee the elven dimension, Nemia continued, picking up where Dusk left off. She smiled when she sensed Anima's anger calming. He battled Shiro for the red scroll and the dimensional katana, thusly exiling his brother in the process. Those of us who were loyal to Stykes followed him to the gates that were sealed shut for many years against humans. He used the katana to open the gates, allowing us to escape our crumbling world. The Iron Wolves is made up mainly of the elves that came with Stykes on that day. We took the land surrounding the mountain that we had appeared on, and made it our territory, and followed our new ruler proudly. She paused, sensing Anima's now peaceful but worried emotions. Stykes used that katana to destroy the gate on this side, to prevent that thing in our dimension coming here and destroying this world. "What does that have to do with Mario?" she asked, a little scared at what she might hear. "Mario didn't come through the gate with Stykes, did she?" "Mario was Stykes' maid in our dimension," Nemia replied softly. "Not many people know that. Mario is also one of Shiro's most loyal followers. On his orders, she was the one who poisoned his mother, paralyzed his father that led to his death, and attempted to kill Stykes as well before we could stop her." Anima reached out and grabbed Nemia's wrist tightly. She disappeared before we left that dimension. "She was in my service for many years before I met Stykes," Anima said, formulating her words carefully. "Neither seemed to react to each other when they rescued me from Tokan. Nothing at all." Her grip tightened until her wrist whitened and shook. "Stykes denies his elfin side," Nemia replied in pain. "He stays as a human more than he does an elf. His memories of the other dimension fade when he's human for long periods of time. He must have subconsciously blocked his painful memories of those events leading up to our escape." She paused, then added, "Mario would have recognized him, though." Anima said nothing. Fear crept up her spine. "Then who was Ciel?" "She was Stykes' first wife who was murdered by the Siconians," Nemia said quietly. She could see the confused look on Anima's face. 5 years ago, the Siconian royal family were all murdered. After a war, one person ascended to the throne. Anima froze, her mind providing the answer before Nemea did. Shiro has become king of Sukunia. Styx braced himself against the tree, his white wings outstretched. His eyes followed his opponent, an albino centaur wearing a similar top to Anima. A red collar stood out prominently around her neck. He glanced at Blade, Hawkeye, and Aruna, who fought their way through the mass of guards around King Ian's carriage. "Be strong," Hannah whispered from where she sat in the tree above him. Blade had placed her up there for safety when he returned. "You can stand now. It's a start." Styx held his dagger tightly and darted towards the centaur. His speed not as fast as he would have liked. His dove flew above the battle, giving him a bird's eye view as well of everything. "Why are you fighting me?" he whispered, passing by the centaur when she dodged his blade. "I can free you, and I can return you to Anima." The centaur's eyes widened and pulled her bow taut, aiming at his heart. He could see a silver bracelet looped around her wrist, its light distracting him slightly. "You don't want to go back to see her?" "What I want or don't want doesn't affect my actions," the centaur said calmly. "I can't control what my body does anymore. If you can free me, then do it." She released the arrow. It whistled through the air and plunged deep into his left wing. Styx spun, drinking in the pain, fueling his speed. Lashing out fast, he flew towards the centaur, his hand outstretched with the hilt of a dagger held tightly by his thumb. The centaur reared, legs ready to kick Styx out of the air. Gracefully he flew around her legs and closed his hand around her throat. The red collar liquefied, seeping into his skin. He floated to sit, like he was going to ride side saddle, on her back. Moving his hand from her neck to raise 2 fingers, he let the remaining liquid pieces of the collar twine around his fingers and hand like a ribbon. "Feeling better?" he asked with a smile. The centaur turned her head to look at him, and then at the 2 rings on their necklace around his neck. "You're Miyako, correct?" She nodded, only once, and looked at him in the eyes again. "Anima's waiting for you." "I knew she would be," Miyako replied, not smiling. "But much has changed, hasn't it?" Styx nodded, his fingers touching the rings. "You were chosen by her?" Styx smiled and tilted his head slightly. "Then..." She lent him a hand and helped him to the ground, bending one of her front legs and crossing her arm across her chest, and she bowed low to him and added, "I am at your service." She raised her head once more to stand tall before bringing her head down to touch his forehead with hers. "Much hurt is in your soul. If you need, I will sign your red scroll as proof of my loyalty." Styx pulled away and raised his hand to his dove. It flew down, alighting on his wrist. He stroked its feathers, his voice quiet, when he finally spoke to her. I don't require you to sign, but I want you to understand that because I was betrayed and violated by Mariel, I cannot trust you. She was held high in Anima's trust, just like you were. I don't know if you are truly who you appear to be or not. And that's it for this one. I like this story because I was the one that wrote it, obviously, but the writing style is annoying the crap out of me. It was a long time ago when I first wrote this, so it's like it's killing me. The writing style's killing me. But yeah, make sure to like, comment and subscribe. Let me know if you want to hear any other stories, or if you want to give me a bit of a writing challenge, I could give it a try. But yeah, otherwise I will see you in the next one. And as always, let your imagination run wild. Bye for now.